Hi, Simon. Hello.
Hi, good afternoon from Johannesburg.
Good to finally meet you. Please, Simon, go ahead with the panel. Thank you very much for joining us today, and of course, all the speakers.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon session of the 2021 Brazil-Africa Forum. My name is Simon. I am speaking to you from Johannesburg. And before we get started, I just wanted to point out that this panel is about trees, really. That's what we are talking about, and I've got a tree behind me here. And when I look out my window, I can see 4 or 5 beautiful trees outside. And everyone watching, I just want you to take a look out your window and see how many trees you can see, because there are a lot of trees in this world. By the latest study from Nature magazine, says that there are 3.04 trillion trees in the world. Now that sounds like a lot of trees, but the truth is that we need every single one of those trees to stay alive if we are going to keep global warming down to acceptable levels. Luckily, our leaders seem to slowly be realizing that this is actually an important thing. At the recent climate change conference in Glasgow, world leaders agreed to eliminate deforestation by 2030. That is just 8 short years away, which means we have a lot of work to do, and we need to do it quickly. For South America and Africa, this particular issue, I think, is one that unites the two continents, because we are home to the largest rainforests in the world, which should be vital carbon stores if they are taken care of properly. But how do we do that? And how do we do so in a way that does not come at the cost of economic development and growth in some of the world's most underdeveloped nations, particularly in and around the Congo rainforest? Now, we've got a fantastic lineup of speakers to address these important issues and to tell us what they are doing to contribute to sustainable solutions. So please allow me to introduce Morgan Doyle, the Inter-American Development Bank's representative in Brazil, Ambassador José Carlos de Fonseca Jr., the Executive Director of the Brazilian Tree Industry, an association that represents Brazil's planted tree production chain, Hervé Bourguignon, a senior venture partner at the Moringa Fund, an investment fund which targets agroforestry projects located in Latin America and sub-Saharan Africa, and Maite Maronhas, a senior advisor at ASA, or the Articulation in the Semi-Arid, which brings together a number of community movements and civil society organizations. Let's begin first with Mr. Doyle. And I wanted to ask you, following on from COP26, can international cooperation really set a framework for change that can safeguard ecosystems in every region?
Hi, can you hear me? I seem to have lost video for a second. Can you hear me?
You're coming through loud and clear.
Okay, good. I hope that you can see me as well. So thank you much for the question, and to the Instituto Brasil Africa for inviting the Inter-American Development Bank for this interesting and important conversation. And thanks to Caroline Ribeiro as well. Before directly answering the question, I'd like to greet our audience and my fellow panel members, Ms. Maite Maronhas, Ambassador José Carlos de Fonseca Jr., and Mr. Hervé Bourguignon. It's a pleasure to participate in this session with you. Without a doubt, joining efforts across countries and institutions is going to be critical to setting a framework for change, as you eloquently laid out, Mr. Alison. Here at the IADB, we are absolutely committed to these sorts of alliances, as well as to the broad fight against climate change, which is central to our Vision 2025, the blueprint that we have laid forth to support sustainable recovery here in Latin America and the Caribbean. In accordance with that agenda, during COP26, we announced some important initiatives to foster climate action that include our resources, but also mobilizing funds and commitments of international actors, such as the Green Climate Fund, the governments of Germany and Netherlands, and other multilateral development banks. I hope that you can see me, because for some reason all the video has gone. Can you confirm, Simon? I'm sorry.
We can see you, but you appear to have frozen.
Frozen. Oh, that's terrible. Anyway, I'll continue and see if I can work out the kinks in a sec. At the core of our call to joint action is a conviction that no single country nor single institution alone will ever be able to safeguard all the forests and the biomes that are relevant here. It's important just to give a sense of the scale of what we're talking about, just to remember the $2.5 trillion annual financing gap to achieve the sustainable development goals, and more specifically, $100 billion of resources that developing nations are seeking to implement climate action. We must work collectively to address those needs, not only because the sums are relevant, but because, and particularly because, the future depends, as you eloquently laid out, on advancing in this agenda of protecting forests, rivers, and natural ecosystems more broadly. Latin America and the Caribbean is one of the most vulnerable regions in the world to climate change impacts. And on the other side of the Atlantic, the World Meteorological Organization forecasts that the last remaining African glaciers will probably, unfortunately, be disappearing in the next 20 years or so. So clearly, the time to act is now. More often than not, as we all know, biomes do not end at borders, but rather remind us that we're talking about internationally shared resources and shared responsibilities. The African savanna, as well as Amazonian forests, all the planet's biomes depend on actions, concerted actions, to allow for creating a unified agenda for preservation of these resources. The good news is that there are practical and efficient ways to contribute to these changes. And international cooperation clearly is key. As a multilateral organization, we've been working to make it happen and invite all those interested in contributing. For example, bioeconomy chains here in the Amazonian biome are incredibly powerful tool to promote forest conservation while creating job opportunities for local communities. And international cooperation can catalyze this model. Last month, we took part in a side event at the World Bioeconomy Forum here in Pará that sought to lay forth the argument for this. This was in the state of Pará. It was clear after the event that global coordination would be required to provide the funding, the knowledge, the standards, and the financial mechanisms to make this a reality. And indeed, a study that we put out just during that forum showed that just in the state of Pará, there's an enormous potential for bioeconomy to generate income sustainably for the communities of Pará, over 240 billion reais over a 20-year period going forward, in a way which is consistent with sustainability. During COP26, the discussions around the value and the need for funding ecosystem services also highlighted the urgency of global cooperation, as international action will be required to forge those mechanisms to sponsor these assets. In the financial markets, investors across the globe can contribute to conservation through ESG committed investments as well. And this has been a key element of our ongoing agenda. IADB has participated in 30% of Latin America's green, social, and sustainable bonds. And we're keen to help unite investors, governments, and companies explore the potential for green finance as an efficient and effective way to fund climate action. The carbon market will also play a major role in forest conservation going forward, and will provide, we understand, we hope, and we aspire, an effective mechanism to take part and to allow for a vehicle for environmental preservation, tackling the issue of climate change head on, but also providing increasing value to the forest, the standing forest. There's clearly no silver bullet here, no simple solution to tackle this urgent and need to safeguard our ecosystems, but coordinated action across a diverse series of instruments and with the engagement of the international community is absolutely critical to contribute to a solution. we're very proud of the work that we've done here in conjunction with the Leticia Pact for the Amazonian Cooperation Treaty Organization, the International Fund for Agriculture and Development, and a broad series of other actors, including federal and state governments and civil society in that end. And we're stand ready to help structure projects, implement projects that will help enable that conservation. Thanks very much. I'll return and try and work out this bug. Forgive me.
Morgan, before you go, I wanted to follow up quickly with you. It seems from your presentation that not only do we need to make these investments to save the planet, but there is also money to be made from sensible mobilization of finance. And my question to you is, how do we keep some of that money in the communities that are going to be most affected by this? In the Congo, in and around the Amazon basin. Historically, they have been marginalized when their resources are extracted in any way whatsoever. How do we change that this time around?
I think it's a really important question, Simon. And I can't speak knowingly about the specific issues that face the Congo, but what we've able to extrapolate from the Latin American experience is that to the extent that bioeconomy chains are marketable and you can create the capacity to extract agroforestry projects in a way which is sustainable, and but be it through cooperatives or through organizations that can ensure that that's done in a way which is both sustainable and provides reasonable return to the communities they're engaged. That with competent certifications as to the fact that they've been extracted in a sustainable way really provides a means to generate income in local communities that can then export those, be it to out of the hinterland, so to speak, and into the capitals, or even abroad. And that, I think, is really promising as a way to ensure that the forest retains its value standing, the living forest. And there's a huge number of products here already that are being commercially developed, but also potential. And so there's an aspect to this that has to do with research and development as well. But I think that's got to be part of the answer. And yes, the second part of your question, there's a huge and growing pool of resources internationally. If you just look at ESG funds broadly, they're expected to increase to $54 trillion in the coming year. This is an enormous amount of money, a pool of money, and the real trick is to ensure that tap into some of those resources, be it through green bonds, sustainability bonds, or whatnot, with adequate supervision and transparency mechanisms, but to ensure that they stay, as you say, at the local level.
Brilliant. Thanks, Morgan. I wanted to bring Maite into this conversation. Now, Maite, your organization brings the voice of thousands of community organizations and civil society organizations into these discussions. From your perspective, is it going to work? Is this international cooperation to save the rainforests and protect deforestation? Is it going to work? And are the people who are going to be affected by it going to be part of these discussions?
Well, Simon, thank you for directing this question to me, and thank you for the invitation. I think that it can work, but we have some thoughts about how it must be done to work. In ASA, we work with a concept that we talk in English, living with the semi-arid, because we are in the semi-arid region of Brazil. And what's that? That's the idea that we need to observe the environment where we are in and think how we can live with that characteristics without looking for changing that, because changing that is very expensive. In Brazil, at least, it didn't work very well. So how we do that? And I'm saying that because when we think about international cooperation, it must come here and reinforce that logic, reinforce the logic that we are already in. So it must value the territories and their characteristics and their experiences and the experiences that people and their communities are doing that are working very well. So that it must be reinforced, and we need to exchange experiences and learning with each other and with people that are in similar conditions that we are. So the other people and communities that living in other semi-arids in the world, like in Africa or in other regions of Latin America, what are they doing and how we can learn with each other. So we think that international cooperation really can help us to do that exchange, and that's very important that international cooperation don't increase the debt that poor people have. So we need to find a way, and we have some clues and how it can be done. That people that are part of the problem, people that are hungry in Brazil have hungry. Oh, I'm sorry for that. That's my cell phone. Sorry. Uh, People that are poor and are part of the problem and that have hunger, because in Brazil we have a lot of hunger, they must be part of the solution. So how that people can produce their own food, and not only produce their own food, but also send that food to the cities and to the citizens in cities. We have that experience in Brazil, working in closed cycles of production and consumption. So, like that, we can consume less carbon and consume less energy. And that is the way we believe that it will help us to construct a more sustainable future. That's it. What I would like to say right now. Thank you.
Maite, if I can follow up on that, when we talk about international cooperation, we sort of imagine governments talking to each other, international organizations making decisions. How do we bring in the voices of people who are actually affected by this? And how do, for example, the affected communities in Brazil, how do they talk to affected communities in Africa? And how do we make those connections to sort of speak with a united voice?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because in Brazil, we have, I think about two ways when you ask me that. In Brazil, we have in organized society, we work a lot with international funds and with international organizations. So that's one way that it yet arrives here for us. So that's a possibility. But in Brazil, in the last 20 years, I can say, we have a very good experience with the work with social organization and the government. And social organization composing, how can I say, parts of the government, and the government really listen to the social organization. So about how things must be done and constructing policies, social policies, and other policies that says how things must be done. And I think that it's a very good way how things could be done. We listen to each other, and I think that research and other possibilities of exchanging experiences in universities or in other institutes or spaces that we can create for that. I don't think I really answered your question, but I guess that's some points and some clues that how we can do that. Because in fact, we must also think about how it work in every place. It worked in Brazil, and in Brazil we could work with the government like that. But I don't know how it can be in other places. But I know that the governments can't keep doing things without talking and really listen to people what they need and how it must be done. It's not just what, but it's how it must be done. It must be listened.
Absolutely, thank you. And I mean, I think events like the Brazil Africa Forum are crucial in creating and forging those linkages. Let's move now to Ambassador Jose Carlos. I wanted to ask you, from an industry perspective, is it possible to protect the forest and have economic growth at the same time? Or are these mutually exclusive concepts?
Thank you, Simon, for this question. I greet all our fellow members of this panel. Very nice to be here. Appreciate the invitation. I'm glad to reply to this because I currently am the executive director of the Brazilian tree industry, which is the association that represents institutionally the whole production chain based on planted forests. Just to give you an idea, we represent over 45 companies of different sizes, plus 10 statewide forest associations. So, and we are, I think, a very clear evidence of bioeconomy at a large scale with very successful results. We are present in over 1,000 municipalities throughout Brazil. We generate, all in all, around 1.5 million jobs directly. If you include indirectly, we are talking of almost 3 million jobs. We have a very positive impact wherever we are in terms of comparison with neighboring communities, be it socially, culturally, education level, and so on and so forth. We plant every day in Brazil 1 million trees. All in all, we have 9 million hectares throughout Brazil in planted forests, while the same companies, the same sector, preserve 6 million hectares in native forests. In a forest management method that is considered benchmark because we mingle native forest with plantation, with a view, of course, to preserving biodiversity and the linkages between those patches of native forests while we plant, harvest and replant wood for our pulp industry, paper, wood panels, all sorts of biomass, and so on and so forth. This is a sector that clearly has had to learn the hard way for the last 40 years how to adapt to a growing requirement in terms of what is now called ESG. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to benefit from very stringent international certifications such as FSC, PEFC, and we would not have turned ourselves into a powerhouse in terms of these products and their outputs to markets all over the world. So in one simple answer, yes, indeed, it is possible to preserve and to develop and to create and share growth and wealth in a country like Brazil. It's interesting that we are talking to you, Simon, all the way in Johannesburg. We have also a very close connection with like-minded associations, such as the one in South Africa, but all over the world, through a platform called the ICFPA, which is the International Council of of National Forest and Pulp and Paper Associations. They are very active. We exchange and compare notes, exchange experiences, showcase best practices, and this is an ongoing dialogue that we carry on. Just a few days ago, we returned from Glasgow, where at the COP, we were very glad to see that in spite of the present circumstances of Brazilian politics, which are not very brilliant, we have to say, that the country was able to join the forest deal alongside with over 100 other nations. So there is light at the end of the tunnel, we hope, and we are looking forward to working closer together in Brazil and with other nations in terms of proving that it is possible to make it compatible to develop and to preserve nature in a sustainable way.
You spoke about how it was, the industry has gone through a period of significant adjustment in recent years. How difficult is it to persuade business leaders of the need to make these kinds of changes? Often this is portrayed in lights of, well, you can make quick profits, but those are not sustainable for the environment, or you can, do the long-term investment. Those take a while to pay off. So from the sort of business leader perspective, how do you convince them that this is a good idea?
Our sector in Brazil is acknowledged to be in the leading position, let's say, in terms of actually having adopted this sort of attitude towards sustainability in a pioneer way, long time ago. Back in 1992, when Brazil hosted the UN conference that gave rise to the conventions on climate and on biodiversity, for instance, the business leaders of Brazil back then already played an important role. And this has been true mostly in our own sector with companies that are over 100 years old, like Klabin and Suzano and Duratex and Gerdau, people who know they are not in for the short term, but they have to connect the past, the present, and the future, generating value and assuring that they can grow through massive and permanent investments in innovation, in science and technology, making good on a promise, on a target to get productivity gains. Just to give a brief example, for instance, if you take eucalyptus, which is a specimen that originated in Australia, where its life cycle takes average of around 18 years from planting to harvesting. In Brazil, through decades of very massive investments on technology, on breeding enhancements, and so on and so forth, this life cycle takes roughly 7 years. So we have been able, through productivity gains, to produce more with less natural resources, using less water, less land, and we have come to a situation where, in our sector at least, we are 100% sure that we can state that there is no need for further expansion at the expense of nature forests in order to continue growth. Right now, there is a portfolio of ongoing and already announced new investments in our sector of over $10 billion until 2024, with new plants, new plantations, but without going beyond the limits that that we follow, which are, it's important to say, limits that are more that are stronger and more stringent than those imposed by the Brazilian legislation. Even though we do not operate in the Amazonia biome, we are following very closely and with huge concern what goes on there. So a few days after the end of the Glasgow conference, we were all very shocked to see the latest numbers in the series following the deforestation patterns in the Amazon. And this is something that our sector, the Brazilian private sector, the Brazilian modern agribusiness, which knows that we cannot become the subject of restrictions and so on and so forth, because most of this deforestation in the Amazon, over 90% of it is the result of illegal criminal activity, and this has to come to an end very soon, much before. Otherwise, we won't be able to beat our target of 2030 or 2028 as in the updated version of our NDC.
Thank you very much, Ambassador José Carlos. Let's hear now from Hervé Bourguignon. Now, you know, these ideas we have are all very important, but I wonder if you can make them a bit more practical for us. So, you know, the Moringa Fund is sitting on a pool of money. How do you use that money to make a real impact? I think you're on mute, Mr. Bourguignon. If you could just unmute your microphone for us.
Sorry. Yeah, I said that I was very grateful to be with you, and I'm glad and thank you very much for inviting me. I think that the international cooperation has proved to be rather difficult to build. We've seen the result of the COP26 with ambiguous result. I think that definitely it is hard to have politics converge and politicians agree on themes that are in fact, very difficult for the countries to follow. We at Moringa, we see that the civil society is much more worried and asking for action. Civil society is pushing governments to act and also putting pressure on companies. Consumers have changed dramatically their way of consuming, particularly in Europe and US. And even in Africa, you will see that recent polls show that if a woman has the choice between an organic product and an organic product, she will go for organic because they know, even in Africa, that organic is better for health, it's better for environment, etc. So the consumers are changing. Even today, a company of a certain size do have to announce a plan to reach zero emissions in a certain lapse of time. The private sector initiative do need to seize the opportunity from this change. So Moringa is an initiative that tries to find a way between private investment and philanthropy at a time when there was so many controversies surrounding climate change and a lot of questions that arose about the inclusion of forests. Yet it was quite obvious that the main cause for deforestation was unsustainable agriculture practices to supply growing needs and poverty of farmers. But for Moringa, the solution was to invest in regenerative agriculture and agroforestry. Agroforestry is the center of Moringa's investment. Agroforestry being defined as a combination of trees and crops so as to have ecological synergies and economical synergies. So Moringa was first formed to propose an alternative path between philanthropy and private investment. We are a so-called triple bottom line, looking for, of course, financial return, but also we are looking for environmental benefits and social impact. Moringa had two sponsors, the Edmond de Rothschild Bank and ONFI. ONFI is a subsidiary of the French Forestry Commission. So Moringa had to convince investors 10 years back that they could bring finance, they would bring finance. Development financing institution like the French Proparco, like the Dutch FMO, like the Spanish IACID, or FinFund, the Fins, and also family offices, Edmond de Rothschild, but also multilateral actors like the African Development Bank or the Cooperación Latina de Fomento. They have agreed to bring about all this money so that we invest in agroforestry project. In fact, we invested in 10 projects in Latin America and Africa, all based on 3 pillars: getting the sourcing from smallholders, in order to reduce poverty. That is to say, buying from them fruits or whatever crops they were producing. Also, the second pillar, building a processing plant close to the commodity or the fruit catchment in order to help them to climb the value chain and to help smallholders to have better revenues and sell the products to the international market. And that is the third pillar, selling to international market, taking advantage of the trend for organic, healthy products, and also to the local markets, particularly in Africa, that have shown a very strong growth. I think the general pattern of Moringa is that, and I will leave you ask perhaps further questions.
Thank you very much for that. I believe that Maite has a question for you, actually. Maite, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. Hervé, thank you for your presentation. That's very interesting. In Brazil, in ASA's, we call ASA experience, agroforestry was very important to grow food and make that idea that I talked before about closed cycles, make it real. Because there are a lot of families and communities that produce with agroforestry that are sending food to the cities and feeding themselves. So that's very important for us. And I would like to ask you, in your experience that's larger than ours in other countries, how do you see that connection about closed cycles of healthy food production, consumption, and agroforestry?
I think it's a very good question. I think you have to make this link between these three pillars. First, the farmers, the communities, women association in Africa, farmers association, and you have to help them with state-of-the-art techniques to improve their agronomy, itineraries, to improve the way of producing, getting certification, organic, or fair trade, whatever, so that they can get a premium. That's the first pillar. The second pillar, which is very important, is to climb the value chain. I think it is very difficult to distribute or to make them benefit of all what you bring if you don't create value. So in all our projects, we have set up a plant to process, for example, the cashew nuts, raw cashew nuts, into roasted cashews, into cashew flour, cashew butter, and sell it to markets. That's the second pillar. I think it's very important. We have, for example, we get mango from our farmers in Mali, and we produce it into a mango puree or frozen mango, and then sell it to the market. We have also coffee in Nicaragua that we get from our rehabilitated, refurbished plantations, and then we process it locally and we sell it to the markets. That's the second pillar. And also I think the marketing is also extremely important. We have, us at Moringa, we focus at two ways. One way is to focus in order to have a certain balance in our balance sheet between the foreign currency that we invest and the transformation into local currency. I think it's important to have a certain part of export. So we export to international markets where we can have a premium. And of course, this premium is important for our growers. But also we sell locally. Can you imagine, for example, that very few Africans have the real taste of their own cocoa that they produce? Because cocoa very often is processed in Europe and then re-imported to Africa. So in fact, it's not the real product that they can taste, because you can imagine that in a chocolate bar that they will buy, the cocoa will come from wherever in the world. It may come from Peru or from Indonesia, not necessarily from Ivory Coast, which is the first producer in the world. So I think the fact that you process locally their own product, you giving them the real taste of their product. So it's normal and natural that you sell it on the local markets. And that's what we try to do.
And on that note, it appears that our time is already over. I know José Carlos has to get on a flight to Sao Paulo, and the Brazil Africa Forum needs to continue. So I wanted to thank our panelists very much for a really fascinating conversation on one of the most important issues of our time. And there's a lot of very interesting work being done around this that we learned about today.